Hello, scholars! Unethico here. I just wanted to chime in really quickly to tell you that I am working on the Bergenworth survey, but unfortunately, it is very, very, very long. There is just so much going on with Bergenworth, despite being such a small place. So I'm going to break the survey up into a bunch of smaller videos, and when I say smaller, they're still going to end up being like 15 minutes to half an hour long each, probably. And so in this survey, I think we're literally just going to ask like two questions. We're going to ask, how does Willem's philosophy differ from Laurence's? For this particular podcast, I had Master Pilbeam on and Sinclair Lore from the Sinclair Lore Snack Covenant podcast. So here is Master Pilbeam's take on how Willem's philosophy is different from Laurence's.
The difference is that this is a confusing thing because when the game first came out, people were saying, the difference is that Bergenworth are pursuing insight and the Healing Church are pursuing blood. And that's not really how it is. The reason people were saying that is because when you go to Bergenworth, it's full of these sort of eldritch monstrosities, these Lovecraftian monsters and tentacles and centipedes and things. When you go to the Healing Church, it's full of beasts. And because we associate them with insight and blood respectively, the idea is, okay, these were two paths that they diverged and they were opposites. It's more that what happened was, when they found this blood in the labyrinth that they realized would allow you to control your body and allow you to... they refer to it as evolution. The idea is this blood is the key to evolving humanity to the next stage. When they start using it, they talk about this on the Metamorphosis runes, that they call it an excessive deviation. That they start using this blood and it starts warping them and changing them into these monsters. So Willem says, okay, no more blood. Not because he is putting a blanket ban on it, saying this is a bad idea, we should never ever do this. He's saying, we're not enlightened enough to control this yet, so we have to get our minds working on the level of a higher being before we can start altering our bodies. And Laurence says, no, I think we can do this now. And he runs off and he just starts injecting blood in people to see what will happen. This is part of the Bergenworth adage, which is a key point in the plot. You learn that Bergenworth had this adage, which was, we are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood, our eyes are yet to open, fear the old blood. Which becomes it's used as a password, and it's something that Laurence says, I will never forget this. This is important to me, and of course he proceeds to forget it.
Right.
But the adage is the way the adage is written is important because it's saying we are undone by the blood, our eyes are yet to open, fear the old blood. As in, we are undone by the blood because our eyes, meaning our enlightenment, our eyes have yet to open. We are not enlightened enough. We are not operating on a high enough plane to understand how this substance works, therefore we must fear it. Laurence is sort of, in his hubris, thinks that he is kind of enlightened enough to use it as is.
Do we know why Laurence thinks that?
I think he's just arrogant.
Okay.
Because, yeah. I mean, you never see Laurence, but from his voice, he's much younger than Willem.
Right.
So it's just the standard story of the sort of arrogant young man thinking he knows more than his master does.
And just to kind of add on to what Master Pilbeam was saying, is that I was in a conversation with Herbert West, and he kind of said that idea comes from Vicar Amelia's little chant and prayer, where she says,
"The foul beasts will dangle nectar and lure the meek into the depths. Remain wary of the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds young."
The assumption is that the head that is on the altar is Laurence's skull, and that the giant bloodletting beast, the headless version that is in the underground labyrinth, that too is also Laurence. And what happened is that when Vicar Amelia says, "and the beast will dangle nectar and lure the meek into the depths," it's saying that is specifically what happened to Laurence. Laurence turned into this beast, and then he went down into the underground labyrinth in order to kind of get something, or that his beasthood kind of compelled him to do that. And the reason he wasn't able to control himself or prevent his beasthood or whatever, it's because of what Vicar Amelia says, where she says,
Remain wary of the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds young.
So Laurence is the one who has the young mind and is arrogant and thinks that he's ready when he really isn't, and that's why things go wrong. But then Master Willem, things don't work out too well for him, right?
No, they both screw up in different ways, because Laurence kind of dives into old blood immediately, and he creates this church where everyone's being injected with this blood and devolving into blobs and turning into beasts. And that all collapses. Willem takes the opposite route, where he's saying, like, well, we need to just sit around and meditate and think until we're operating on these they call it transcendental planes of thought. But what happens is he's never quite happy with... He never believes he's reached enlightenment, so he just sort of, like, withers away because he just sits in his chair all day. He wants to evolve humanity to, like, the next level, basically. That's his plan. There's a note in the lecture hall that says, like, he warns them against what he calls evolution without courage. So he's saying, like, he says it's evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race. So the idea is what he's worried about is that there's this old blood that if you inject it into yourself, your body becomes malleable and you can, like, shift and change and become something else. But that doesn't worry him in and of itself. What worries him is that what if we get it wrong? If we get it wrong, we'll turn into beasts, which is what ends up happening to Yana. So what he wants to do is he wants to get everyone at Byrgenwerth, or at least himself, like, operating on the level of, like, the Great Ones. And then they can start guiding human evolution. He wants to do what we end up doing in the game, which is that if we get the 3 or 4 chords, and we use them all, we transform into an infant Great One. And it says, like... something like, that ending is called Childhood's Beginning, and it says, like, you've lifted humanity into its next childhood. So that's sort of what Willem wants to do. He wants to take humanity and say, like we're going to move on to the next level now. We're going to evolve into, like, a psychic, you know, a new race, a new consciousness, and he wants to make sure that works the way he wants. That's his plan.
Richie?
Yeah?
The note, evolution without courage, what does it say in Japanese?
It says, this is, again, like, it's an odd phrase. Because the Japanese one is just, like, it's like a deviant evolution, or, like, it basically means, like, an evolution where, that's, like, it ties into the way the metamorphosis runes say, like, excesses of deviation, when they start using the blood. So he's saying, like, an evolution that is deviant, as in what happened with the metamorphosis runes. If we allow that to happen, that will destroy us. So we have to start operating on, like, a higher plane of thought.
Yeah, it makes much more sense without the courage thing.
Yeah, I don't... There's a lot of terminology that's translated 2 different ways. And I don't know if that's because, like, they didn't understand they were supposed to be related, or if it was literally, like, 2 different translators.
And just to read again from this post called The Philosophy of D.H. Laurence in Bloodborne, Lovecraft is only half of what makes this game tick, at most. The other half is the work of a relatively obscure late 19th century poet by the name of D.H. Laurence. Blood is the essential foundation of one's being. When I take a woman, then the blood precept is supreme. My blood knowing is overwhelming. There is a transmission, I don't know of what, between her blood and mine in the act of connection, so that afterwards, even if she goes away, the blood consciousness persists between us. When all the mental consciousness is suspended, and I am formed then by my blood consciousness, not by my mind or nerves at all. Now I am convinced of what I believed when I was about 20, that there is another seat of consciousness than the brain and the nervous system. There is a blood consciousness which exists in us independently of the ordinary mental consciousness which depends on the I as its source or connector. There is a blood consciousness with the sexual connection holding the same relation as the I and seen holds to the mental consciousness. One lives, knows, and has one's being in the blood, without any reference to nerves and brain. This is one half of life, belonging to the darkness, and the tragedy of this, our life, and of your life, is that the mental and nerve consciousness exerts a tyranny over the blood consciousness. and that your will has gone completely over to the mental consciousness and is engaged in the destruction of your blood being or blood consciousness, the final liberating of the one, which is only death in result. We and the cosmos are one. The cosmos is a vast body of which we are all still parts. The sun is a great heart whose tremors run through our smallest veins. The moon is a great gleaming nerve center from which we quiver forever. Who knows the power that Saturn has over us, or Venus? But it is a vital power rippling exquisitely through us all the time. Now all this is literally true, as men knew in the great past and as they will know again. We have lost the cosmos by coming out of responsive connection with it, and this is our chief tragedy, and we have lost the moon, the cool, bright, ever-varying moon. It is she who would caress our nerves, soothe them with the silky hand of her glowing, soothe them into serenity again with her cool presence. For the moon is the mistress and mother of our watery bodies, the pale body of our nervous consciousness, and our moist flesh. Oh, the moon could soothe us and heal us like a cool great Artemis between her arms, but we have lost her. In our stupidity we ignore her, and angry she stares down on us and whips us with nervous whips. Oh, beware the angry Artemis of the night heavens, beware the sprite of Cybele, beware the vindictiveness of horned Astarte. So if we kind of buy this idea that the character of Laurence in Bloodborne was inspired by the real-life poet D.H. Laurence, then maybe you could make a case that there is this philosophical difference where Master Willem is focused on like the eye and like the nerves and the brain. Laurence is more focused on blood and what he calls the blood consciousness. And there's this line here where it says, when I take a woman, then the blood precept is supreme. My blood knowing is overwhelming. There's a transmission, I don't know of what, between her blood and mine in the act of connection. So in Victorian times, there was this misconception that during sex, blood was exchanged between partners. So it's like when he has sex, he feels these very, I don't know what you would call maybe animalistic urges, and he kind of embraces it. And what's interesting is that the Laurence that you can fight in the Nightmare, if you beat him, he drops a rune called Beast Embrace, which maybe lends credit to the idea that Laurence kind of embraced whatever is the innate and bestial instinct of mankind. The indescribable sound is broadcast with the caster's own vocal cords, which begs the question, what terrible things lurk deep within the frames of men? So the idea is that beasthood is actually the natural state of mankind. As according to Darwin, in the real world, humans are evolved from chimps. But in Bloodborne, humans are evolved from canines. That's why when you go to the Nightmare Frontier, it's like you see these beasts that are using these primitive tools, and you start off in a cave, so it's like, okay, you're going back to caveman times, and you're seeing the origin of mankind. This was also later talked about in there was a leak a few years back, but apparently this was actually a part of the script at one point in time, that yes, that humans are evolved from beasts. And so the rune that Laurence drops when you fight him in the Nightmare says, after repeated experiments in controlling the scourge of beasts, the gentle embrace rune was discovered. When its implementation failed, the embrace became a forbidden rune, but its knowledge became a foundation of the healing church. Those who swear this oath take on a ghastly form and enjoy accentuated transformation effects, especially while wielding a beast weapon. So that kind of leads me to believe that Laurence actually embraced his beasthood, and I think sort of like the suspicious beggar, where he's capable of preserving his humanity, but then also turning into a beast. He can change back and forth, I guess. This is kind of what Laurence might have been after. He wanted to embrace the strength of beasthood while also preserving his humanity. And let's also keep in mind that beasthood works adversely to insight. The more insight you have, the harder it is to build up your beasthood bar. And so the less insight you have, the easier it is to build up your beasthood bar. So that could lend credit to the idea that Willem is supposed to be like this person who's focused on insight and the eye, as D.H. Laurence would say, and then Laurence in Bloodborne is more focused on beasthood and blood, and kind of embracing his innate animal instinct, as D.H. Laurence the poet would say, in reality. So I do think that you can make a case that there is this philosophical difference between Laurence and Master Willem, where Master Willem believes that beasthood is a bad thing, while Laurence thinks that it's a good thing and that it's something that humans should adopt and should control. And Laurence's skull tells us the skull is a symbol of Laurence's past and what he failed to protect. So in other words, his human skull is the symbol of what he failed to protect. He failed to protect his humanity. So it isn't just that he wants to turn into a beast, it's that he wants to turn into a beast and also preserve his humanity. That makes me think that he wanted to be like the suspicious beggar who is capable of turning back and forth between, a beast and also a human. He preserves his humanity while also kind of embracing beasthood. Master Pilbeam pointed out that in an interview with Miyazaki, he specifically describes that the harder it is someone tries to cling on to his humanity, the more horrible of a beast he becomes, and that's why clerics turn into the worst beasts. And so I think Laurence, Laurence is supposed to be like the most abhorrent of all the cleric beasts. So maybe it isn't even necessarily that he wants to turn into a beast, but it's that he's tried so hard to preserve his human form that he unknowingly ends up turning himself into a beast. So I think part of the philosophical difference is that Laurence embraces his innate beasthood and seeks to preserve his humanity, while Master Willem is willing to let go of his humanity to evolve into something greater and fears the inherent evil of beasthood. Laurence does not. And I think that's going to do it for this episode of You Choose the Lore. It is just this one question, and it just has these few options available. So I don't know. So if you want to add something else, because I feel like of all the topics that we could have a great conversation about, this is probably the one. The schism between Willem and Laurence. That's a really important point in the plot. So feel free to throw in your own theory too. And when we start going back and talking about the other surveys, and people can go back and change their answers, then we can have a second round of voting and things like that. And you can just vote for the idea that you like. We're just trying to figure out what story we want to tell as a community. And if you like one idea instead of another, then go ahead and vote for that idea. That's perfectly legitimate. So that'll wrap it up then for this episode of You Choose Lore. I will see you guys again, probably very soon for the next part, where I believe we will start talking about why Master Willem is so brain dead. So until that next time, I'll goodbye.